So I am honored to have such a diverse group of intellectuals and experts on various alternative voting methods here today, starting with Matt Otis of the Equal Vote Coalition. Please welcome Matt, everyone. We have Clay Shentrup of the Equal Vote Coalition, a volunteer here with us today. Thank you. Aaron Hamlin, the founder of Center for Election Science. Thank you for being here today, Aaron. And we have Rob Richie, the founder of Fair Vote. Welcome, Rob. So we're going to do more of an open format today. We're going to do about a 2-3 minute or so introduction. We have a few speakers with some brief PowerPoints with their introductions. And then we're going to go into an open discussion. And definitely just ask everybody that's participating to, we may have differences, but to recognize that we can have conversations and really have a dialogue that's open and of utmost kindness and compassion with each other. It's really up to the voters to decide what sort of alternative voting method is best for you, for them. And so that's what this platform here is, as a 501c3 nonprofit for Equal Elections, is here to help bring these sort of intellectuals together. So we're going to start off with our first speaker today, Mr. Matt Otis of Score Voting. He's with the, again, with the Vote Coalition, for Equal Vote Coalition. So Matt, welcome to the symposium.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Free and Equal for providing a forum for us to discuss just all of these different ideas out there. There's some really great ones coming down the pipes, and I'm excited about this. And I'm really excited that you allowed me to come here to talk about what I think is one of the best ideas, which is star voting. Some of the folks have been on stage and in this scene for a little bit of time, and I'm a relative newcomer, so I thought I'd give a little bit of a background about myself. I'm currently in Oregon. However, I moved to Oregon from Texas, and in part, I actually moved with my feet. Earlier, we saw some presentations on gerrymandering, and my city, my hometown Austin, I'd been there for 30 plus years, and for an entire generation we'd been gerrymandered, and I saw no changes coming down the pipes, and so that was part of my motivation to move to somewhere else. Some of you might live in other areas though and notice that maybe your area isn't a political utopia either, and whenever I moved to Oregon, I saw that there were several local politicians kind of exploiting some of the outdated systems, and they were using those exploits to kind of retain some of their unwarranted political power. And for the last few years, I've been working from the ground up in the Portland, Oregon area to try to change some of those systems and methodologies. So with all of that, it kind of came down to how would I best be able to change those systems? I got involved in some of our local district elections, and those ones were multi-member boards. And so I reached out to multiple, like a pretty normal citizen, I reached out to multiple citizen organizations, usually involving the words like fair or equal or vote or something like that, and just kind of reached out and said, hey, here's what I'm trying to do, and got responses from people. Actually, Rob has emailed me, whether you know it or not, and then some other folks in different coalitions did. And one of the things that I came across, though, was star voting. It was relatively new to me, and I really loved it because it hit some of the key things that I loved about trying to make a system better overall. It focused a lot on equality, making sure that anytime somebody votes, their vote is always going to be counted in some way, shape, or form. Not every voting system can do that. I love that there's honesty. That one was a huge one for me. How can I make sure that I can vote honestly and not spend most of my voting time trying to figure out, do I vote for them? But if I do, I give too much power to this other person. That's a pointless game. Can we get past that? Accuracy, knowing that whenever I am voting, that it will be able to be counted accurately and easily. And then especially some of the simplicity. Whenever I was talking to these local folks at this kind of ground up level, I really needed to make sure that whatever I put in their face was not confusing in any way, shape, or form. Super ideally, I could just hand them a ballot and they would be able to start voting without almost any instructions. And that's where we came across, where star voting and I met one another, and I was like, oh, you're fantastic. So I wanted to give a quick run through. It's actually here on the presentation back there. So the ballot itself is very, very simple. It's a 0 through 5 score ballot. And you're simply going to go through the list of candidates and you're going to score them between 0 and 5 to show your preference. And if you don't really know what you want to score a candidate, which absolutely does happen, then you don't have to, and you can just leave it blank, and that's automatically mathematically counted as 0. From there, what we simply do is we simply look at the score. 5 is worth 5, 4 is worth 4. This is really easy, so 5 and 5 is 10. So you just add everything up. Super simple math there, very easy again for me to explain. I then look at the top 2 scoring candidates. From there, I then look at each individual ballot, and I say, on this particular ballot, did I prefer the candidate A or candidate B, who were the 2 top scoring candidates? From there, it's very simply, in this ballot, Andrew is going to get the vote because Andrew had a score of 4 and Edith had a score of 1. We go through all the different ballots and see where the preferences fall, and essentially each person gets a automatic runoff in this particular manner. And then at the end, you just sum up what that automatic runoff is, and whoever has the majority wins. Very, very simple rules.
Simple.
Yes, and you can do it with very simple math, and I've done it by just sitting in for like the local county, one of the county political parties was looking to maybe use this, and we actually literally just hand wrote out unique ballots based off of like, I think restaurants in the neighborhood and which ones we liked most. We could do this for anything, and then we just hand counted every one of them, and then somebody, I was like, I want you to be a spoiler and try to elect this other one, and
Right.
it didn't work. It was really resilient.
We'll
So.
go into that in way detail throughout the symposium. So that was a really great analysis. Thank you so much, Matt,
Yeah.
for being here, coming in all the way from Oregon too.
Yes.
Right. So thank
Yep.
you. So, all right. Well, Clay Shentrup, well, your topic will be talking about plurality voting.
Yeah, I'm generally talking about score voting, the family of methods that is score voting. So score voting simply means you're going to rate the options on a 0 to 5 scale, for instance, and there are siblings or sort of related systems here of score voting. One of them is star voting, so you just add that top 2 runoff to get an extra layer of protection against strategic voting. If you want to go the simple route, you can take score voting on like a 0 to 5 scale and just compress it down to a 0 to 1 scale. It becomes binary, so that's what approval voting is. And you can implement approval voting by taking a simple plurality voting ballot that we're all familiar with, and you simply take away that restriction that says you can only vote for one candidate, so you can vote for as many as you like. Now, I read a headline this summer that I think is really relevant that simply said, Biden allies attack Warren's electability. Biden allies attack Warren's electability. And I think that headline encapsulates so much about what is defective and broken in our current way of voting. We intuitively, whether we are deep in the weeds on this topic or not, we know what is going on there in the psychological game that is being played, and it is one of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The rhetoric there is trying to get you, as for instance, perhaps an Elizabeth Warren supporter, to think in terms of fear of what happens if she does clinch the nomination of her party, and then she makes it to the general election against the Republican nominee, maybe Donald Trump, and perhaps loses. And then the regret you might feel would be that in retrospect, you might think, oh, if only I had voted for Joe Biden. He may not have been my first choice, but I'd be much happier than with Donald Trump. So if I had voted for him and he had gotten the nomination and made it to that general election, well, that would be like a lesser evil for me. And that's a result I can tolerate. And so even if this isn't true, the actual math about the actual numbers here, the fact that even the fear of that being the case could influence how you vote is a big problem, and it disadvantages people who may not be perceived to be quote-unquote electable, right? And so that has its own way of making money more influential, or if you are a person of color, if you're a woman, it can become harder to convince people that you're electable, even if you are broadly supported. So that's a big defect. So when we're thinking about, what system are we going to use to remedy this, we have to really put it in that situation and say, what happens if we use this alternative voting system? So one alternative that has been discussed a lot is ranked voting systems, for instance, instant runoff voting. So you put an instant runoff voting ballot in the scenario and you see what happens, and does it change that fundamental dynamic? And I would say, unfortunately, it would not be the case. So for instance, if I want to rank sincerely Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, just to keep it simple and focus on those 3 options, what I may fear happening, sort of analogous to the situation I just described, is that yes, my support for Elizabeth Warren is effective. She makes it to the next round. But then what if she doesn't have enough support after Biden has been eliminated to defeat Donald Trump? I may feel this sense of regret and wish that I had moved up my second choice, Joe Biden, to the number 1 spot. And in so doing, I would have had to sort of throw Elizabeth Warren, my true favorite, under the bus. So one thing that is really interesting mathematically about the score voting family of systems is that it eliminates that problem. You can safely support Elizabeth Warren if she is your favorite. If you are concerned that she maybe can't win, then you could show support for somebody that you may think is more electable, like a Joseph Biden, but you don't have to ever take somebody who is your sincere favorite and then push them down lower. And so that's something that makes these systems especially resistant to tactical behavior. And then another big issue for us, another sort of pillar of, I think, a good modern voting method is transparency. So we all talk about who wins and does that reflect the will of the voters. But there's this whole other issue of where is public opinion headed? What is the Overton window looking like? And so we need to see transparent, views of the support for other candidates who may not now be frontrunners, but may be the frontrunners of the next generation. So if you look at the polling data we have here, this comes from an exit poll that was done by Occupy Wall Street in 2012 in New York City. And so the results you see here, they let people vote 4 different ways, but they show Obama, of course, it's New York City, so it's very left-leaning. And so he wins with 84.9% of the vote. But the really interesting thing is how everyone else does here. So you see that Romney comes in number 2 with 8.3%, but then Jill Stein and all these third-party candidates have this very narrow sliver. So if we go to the next slide here, this is going to be approval voting results. So just by letting people vote for as many as they want, all of a sudden Mitt Romney is no longer second place, but he's the last candidate in this. And then Jill Stein has the support of 51.9% of these respondents. So this is very transparent. Then you go to the next slide. And this is actually score voting. So you see it's very similar, but you have a little more greater resolution because you can rate the candidates like 0 to 5. Same thing. We can see the support that Gary Johnson, the Libertarian, had, Virgil Goode, Peta Lindsay, Jill Stein. So it's extremely transparent. And then we go to the next slide here, and we see on the left we have those original plurality voting results. On the right, we see the instant runoff results, and you see that Obama still gets a majority in the first round, so he still has all of that support, and you can't see the second place support. And then the final slide here is, that I'll just leave it on is just, this is the subsequent rounds of instant runoff voting. We can skip past this for the sake of time, but this is a recent poll that was done that Aaron might shed some light on later by the Center for Election Science. So it's a poll that was done where respondents were allowed to vote in the Democratic primary. Elizabeth Warren takes it, but you can see how it differs between approval and plurality voting. So there's the transparency angle.
Thank you, Clay Shentrup. Appreciate it. Aaron, with the Center for Election Science, please let our viewers know who you are and why you're here and what you support.
Sure. So I'm the executive director for the Center for Election Science, and I got into this the way that I think a lot of people did, and that is just being frustrated with the current system that we have. When I was in grad school, it was during an election year in 2008, and I was out to eat with my friends, and we were talking about who we were going to vote for in that election. And it was really surprising to me as we were going around the table, and I knew my friends, just like you know your friends in terms of like their ideology. And it was surprising to me when they were talking about voting against their interest. And when I asked them why, they said, well, I don't want to throw my vote away. I don't think this person is going to win. And this was really alarming to me. And so I walked away from that dinner that evening. I could either kind of think less of my friends, which I didn't want to do, or I could look and say, well, maybe there's some kind of other factor here going on. And that's when I learned about voting methods and learned that using better voting methods is a way to make sure that we're able to capture that reflection of support for other candidates. And so that kind of is what got my spark going. And in law school, I helped to found the Center for Election Science. And what's important about the work that we do there is we went into this agnostic. We didn't pick a voting method just because out of convenience. We looked at all the different voting methods, and then we analyzed them. And we used a number of kind of metrics to look at the different voting methods. One was, does it elect a good winner? How complicated is it for voters? How complicated is it for actually administrating it during an election? And also, does it reflect candidate support? Well, approval voting does well on all of those things. One is that it tends to elect a consensus-style winner. The ballot is very easy. With approval voting, you're simply picking as many candidates as you want. You're not ranking anything complicated. Just pick as many candidates as you want, and the candidate with the most votes wins. It's very easy to do, and it's easy to administer because you're just simply adding up all the approvals, and the candidate with the most votes wins. And then the other thing that's really nice about it is that It does a great job at gauging the reflection of support for all the candidates, even candidates who don't win. So under approval voting, you can always support your honest favorite, even if that candidate doesn't look like they're going to win. And because approval voting is so simple and it uses all the information, here we're just talking about addition, as you could see earlier, in the 2020 Democratic primary election, when we had done that poll, you see this nice reflection of support for all the candidates. This is support that's completely hidden under our Choose One system that hardly allows us to provide any information whatsoever. And so, I would say that we deserve a better voting method, and it doesn't have to be needlessly complicated. When we look at the history of voting methods, we see that sometimes when voting methods add another layer of complexity, they can get repealed. In some cases, maybe not justified. In other cases, maybe so. But if we have a solution that is not complicated and it does the job, that's why we go ahead and support approval voting. And it's also worth noting that, and it'll come out here, that approval voting isn't something that's been used a lot in elections. So it got its academic founding in the late 1970s. And then it wasn't until the end of 2017 when we got real funding for our organization, where less than a year after that funding, we brought approval voting to its first US city, the city of Fargo, North Dakota, 120,000 people. And now we're working to replicate that and scale that in the city of St. Louis. And we look forward to moving on from there.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for that introduction. And finally, we'll have Rob Richie, founder of FairVote.
Thank you.
Say hello to our viewers.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
So great to be here. And the common thread is that we are interested in systems that deal with races where we have more than two choices. So that's if we only have two choices, having a single choice is quite expressive. But if you have more than two choices and you only can vote for one, then you're leaving a lot on the table about what you might think. My personal experience sort of coming from this, I came of political age in 1980. It was my first election to vote in. John Anderson was running for president that year, and against Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. And this whole issue of, can you vote for the person you like? Is that person a spoiler candidate? Came up, and 12 years later, I actually had a chance to start FairVote with John Anderson. And sort of in the first election where Ross Perot was running and ultimately got 19% of the vote, and out of 50 states, only one was won with more than half the votes, and really triggered a conversation about this. Ranked choice voting was what we focused on when we're electing one person. We've heard earlier today conversations about systems of proportional representation for legislatures, and that's always my first choice when you're picking a legislature. But when you're electing a single person, ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting is a very proven solution, and that's part of what makes it attractive to me. We have a lot of experience with it, and it's all the Canadian political parties use it. It's used in multiple countries. More than 60 colleges and universities, students sort of on their own volition have come and started to use ranked choice voting. Politically, during the time that I've been at FairVote, we've seen it adopted now in more than 20 cities, counties, and the state of Maine, which is now going to be using it for U.S. Senate, U.S. House, and all of their primary elections and president in 2020. We're working in 4 states where the Democratic primaries are going to use a ranked choice ballot. The basic idea is that you go all in with your first choice, and that's sort of the human psychology of choice is often tied to that. But if your first choice can't win, and the math that makes that the case is the candidate is in last place, then you go to your backup. You go to your second choice, and that's sort of similar to a runoff election, which is very common. Most presidential elections around the world use runoff elections. And in a runoff election, like in France, the thing they say is like, vote your heart in the first round, vote your head in the second. And basically, ranked choice voting kind of gives you that chance of sort of voting for whom you want. And there are sort of mathematical scenarios where you can say, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But what we see in practice is that people actually really use ranked choice voting. They really do vote for their sincere choices. We're starting to see lots of good results from it. We had 11 cities use ranked choice voting this November. And say, for instance, two first uses in Utah, one city had 7 candidates running. Almost 2 out of 3 voters ranked all 7 candidates. More than 90% ranked 2. And you really see a change in how candidates act in relation to voters and how voters consider candidates. And you start thinking more deeply, and the connection between candidate and voter and ultimately representative and voter really changes. And that sort of on-the-ground real experience really confirms the values that I brought me to want to work for this system.
Thank you very much. It's Rob Richie of Fair Vote. We saw some slides a bit on how the voting works with the score voting. I wanted to ask maybe Matt and Clay a bit in here, take some turns. I'm reading here that voters in, for example, Lane County, Eugene, Oregon, narrowly rejected a version called STAR, Score Then Automatic Runoff, in 2018, but proponents plan to put it on the ballot again. So I'm getting this information from the League of Women Voters of Boulder County. So I wanted to get your take on what's going on there with STAR voting and the plans for it to be on the ballot again.
All right. So, I just, for the heads up, I'm not actually in Eugene, so I'm not completely tied in with that particular group. I know they work very hard, and I really have to give them kudos for that strong effort. They're coming
and maybe
in.
the overall efforts of what's going on with STAR on a national level as well.
STAR on a national level? Okay. So that's part of why we're here, is to better explain what this is. It has its roots and its heart in the Pacific Northwest, and we did our first big push, and it was actually a bigger push than we thought we would be able to do at first, is to get it on like a full county-wide level. Narrowly didn't make it, and a lot of that is due to fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so that's one thing I really want to stress for this group. Rob, for example, you wrote an article against STAR voting, and you wrote that article kind of saying, hey, I think RCV is better than STAR voting, and I totally get that, but I think the thing that we should all really take into mind here is that when we discuss these different second, third generation voting systems, we need to always put like at the very top header of, guys, this is always, like, this is going to be a better option than first past the post, than plurality at large. That is really, honestly, what people latched onto to kill it. And then also within some of the Portland areas. Now we still got really close, and that momentum allowed more people to see, and so we're really hopeful for some of these next efforts within Eugene. We also just got onto the Multnomah County Democrat Party. They're going to be electing, I'm forgetting the name of the people, but basically whenever people go to the bigger Democratic convention.
Delegates.
The delegates, thank you so much. So when they elect their delegates, they're going to be elected through a STAR voting method, and it got approved by the Democratic Party. So we're going to see some of the first consequential elections in STAR voting coming up soon. I'm really excited about that. And once we do that, then maybe 100 years from now we'll be able to say, oh, there's this country and this thing and this other place all doing STAR voting. But right now, we just started in 2014. And the fact that we even got on a ballot within 4 years of being invented, that's really awesome.
4 years, so
Yeah.
it's really, really new.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Did you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, I mean,
Nick?
actually, maybe some of the history is actually relevant here. I got into this issue when I was actually living in Portland, where I am now, but I kind of had a circuitous trip to some other places. But when I first got into this, I found the website of Warren Smith, who is this, brilliant math PhD who did these computer simulations to determine like how well do these different systems support sort of the will of the people in a very mathematical sense. And he threw game theory in there, like what happens if some of the voters try to game the system. And he was really astonished to find that no matter how he tuned his models, score voting, or as he called it at the time, range voting, came out the best of all the systems. And that was really surprising for him. But he was a mathematician. He wasn't really great at getting his message out. So myself, other people, Aaron, we kind of met online and were brought together and trying to sort of extol the virtues of this different class of voting methods. One of my first emails to him was actually sort of berating the idea and saying, wouldn't I just, give my favorite the maximum score and everyone else a 0? And sort of through a, tour de force of game theory, he kind of shot back to me this whole idea of, well, no, what if you're a Green Party supporter who currently you vote for the Democrat? Obviously, you'd want to support the Democrat strategically, but then also support the Green sincerely, right? So it gets more complicated. Then 2008, the book Gaming the Vote came out, and it's sort of this great kind of layperson-friendly exploration of the 5 major alternative systems. But over time, no matter how much we talked about this issue of gaming, this whole notion of like bullet voting and tactics kept resurfacing. And so rather than try to constantly reiterate that sort of game theoretical argument against that, in 2000, I believe it was actually 5 years ago, so in 2014, there was a conference actually in Eugene at the University of Oregon, brought together by Mark Frohnmayer, a Eugene entrepreneur, and his father was actually former chancellor of the University of Oregon, former Oregon Attorney General. They brought together individuals, myself, Aaron, Rob was there. We all spoke in a very similar kind of way. And it was shortly after that meeting that I think Mark struck upon this idea of, okay, some of the points the ranked choice voting crowd do make sense. What about adding this instant runoff to score voting and having this hybrid that maybe helps sort of find a compromise? So that's kind of how this all was created. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Aaron, since you didn't have a slide at the beginning, could you go in greater detail of your take on how approval voting works? And I would love to hear also, kind of question and a half in here, the successes of Fargo. What's happened there?
Sure. So approval voting, well, we actually didn't really need so much of a slide because approval voting is so easy. Approval voting, you just imagine a normal ballot when you choose only one candidate. Now imagine being able to choose as many of those candidates as you want. And then the one candidate who has the most votes wins. Like, that's approval voting. It's pretty straightforward. And in terms of Fargo, we were really excited about Fargo. Fargo had a really interesting history where they were getting elections, where someone would win for their commission with like 22% of the vote. And it was embarrassing for the commission. So the commission created a task force. One of those members of the task force had reached out to us and said, hey, this approval voting looks like it's going to be able to address our problems. He went back, convinced other people on the task force to go ahead with it, recommended it to the commission, but interestingly, the commission sat on its hands. And it's also worth noting that one of the people on the commission was one of those same people that won with 22% of the vote. So the person that reached out to us from the task force, Jed, he was upset by this. And so he went and gathered everyone he knew, got it on the ballot by gathering signatures, and then started an organization, and through that local organizing and bringing in key stakeholders, was able to advocate for approval voting. And we at the Center for Election Science worked alongside his efforts to run an education campaign, and it was received extremely well. So the ballot initiative itself won by 63.5%, which for a first time is pretty awesome.
All right, thank you for that very much. And Rob, so for those of our viewers who've never heard of ranked choice voting, could you let them know what it is, and then a little bit more detail of your successes that you mentioned in 20 cities, counties, Maine, 2020, please.
So the big difference with a ballot, which will look different to voters, is that rather than be limited to just vote for one, you are able to rank candidates in order of choice, first, second, third, and so on. In all the U.S. implementations, that's an optional ranking, and so you can stop at one, you can rank 2, 3, 4, and that's the voting side. And what you see is most voters in the elections that really matter will use their rankings, and generally for mayor or for congressional or a gubernatorial primary like Maine had last year, you'll see about 9 and 10 voters who will use their rankings. The way you count the rankings is you treat each ballot as a single vote. So you add up your first choices, and when you're electing only one person, if someone starts off by winning more than half of first choices, then you have an immediate winner. Kind of the sort of example that Clay provided of a poll where where Barack Obama had 88%, and like, okay, you're done. So you're trying to use this functionally to get to a winner. So, but if you don't have a 50% plus one winner, then the candidate that is in last place is eliminated, and then the ballots that were counted for that candidate are then counted for the voter for the candidate who was ranked second. And then you tally the results and see if you have a majority winner. And it's that sort of back and forth process, and the field narrows. We recommend, when there's not an immediate 50% plus one winner, to always run it down to 2 and get a clear, quote unquote, instant runoff of comparing the top 2 candidates head to head. And that's what's done, say, in San Francisco. On the political side, it's been a really exciting run, particularly the last few years. And part of that is that we are finally getting a voting equipment regime that is ready for a ranked choice ballot. We have a very unresponsive sort of regime of how we vote in this country. both in the rules, but actually in the mechanics, and the mechanics were getting in the way of the rule change. But now we are getting to a point where this really is just more of a policy decision, and we're seeing a lot more proven experience. So the biggest wins are from Maine, where the voters in Maine first passed it in 2016. They actually got a legislative repeal based on concern about mechanics of running it largely in 2017. They maintained it via a people's veto vote in June 2018, and then they used it in that primary for governor and some other elections that year, that primary, and then they used it in the general election for U.S. House races and U.S. Senate, all of which had more than 2 candidates, and you really had a real-life experience. And flowing from that, they've now extended it to the presidential election, which will be used in 2020. And from that kind of energy, we're seeing other statewide ballot measure drives. The big one coming up is the state of Massachusetts, but we'll also probably see a version of one in Alaska. We're just seeing a lot of cities adopting it in different ways in a whole mix of places, but 11 cities just used it in November. As I said, 5 for the first time. And you know what it offers to lawmakers, often our charter commission, is like solving a problem. So for instance, in New York City, which is the biggest jurisdiction that has passed ranked choice voting in a really exciting campaign, voters gave it 73% of the vote just a few weeks ago. And they have 2 problems that they're solving, which in their primary elections, they had a runoff system for mayor and for other citywide offices, which often resulted in a lot of expense and turnout declines and a big uptick in negative campaigning. And then when they didn't use runoff elections in all their city council races, they have public financing, they have a lot more people running, and the challenge for there was that you were seeing people win with low pluralities. So the Charter Commission recommended going to an instant runoff system because it sort of solved both problems. And you see that in a range of ways. The ranked choice voting is seen as solving problems and working.
All right, well, thank you very much. I wanted to emphasize that we're going to shift over to audience questions. I'm going to do one more round here, and I really want to open up a good chunk of this time because we got some knowledgeable audience members there that I think want to really learn from all of you. What makes your voting method the best? I think I usually the presidential debates, I take turns, so we'll go right to Clay and work our way. Matt will be last. A couple minutes, 2-3 minutes, what makes it the best?
Sure.
Why should the U.S. implement your voting method?
Right. So I'm sort of a big tent guy where I don't so much have a specific system, but I think the score voting family is the right place to be. And that means cardinal or rated voting methods as opposed to ordinal or ranking methods. I think there are really 3 pillars that you need. There's lots of other secondary criteria you could look at, but one is the system accurate to public opinion? Does it express the will of the people accurately? 2 is, does it take the fear out of voting so that we aren't influenced by notions of electability, which could be how tall are you, have you raised money, what endorsements do you have? And then 3, we need to have transparency into the support for all the candidates, not just the winners, so that the sort of the good ideas of tomorrow, we can sort of see them coming and sort of support those. So what really drew me into this when I looked into the issue starting in 2006 was initially just the game theory of this guy, Warren Smith, this math PhD, saying, I've actually been able to mathematically prove that if every voter is strategically reasonable, doing what is in their own best interest, as they tend to do, that this score voting family of methods behaves really, really well. It tends to elect what we call Condorcet winners, which means a candidate who would beat every rival by a majority. They're summable. You just add up points. So as you saw in my beginning graphs there, you just have these sort of bar charts that you can look at and see the relative support for all candidates. And then when it comes to taking that fear out of voting, the strategy with any voting method is you want to make sure that your vote is as powerful as possible. So you want to identify the front runners and sort of push them apart as much as you can. And only once you've done that can you think, now what can I do, right? So with the system we use now, you only get one vote. So once you've cast that tactical vote for, say, the Democrat or the Republican, there is no what's next. You're done. Exit the voting booth. With approval voting, it's very simple to see that maybe you're green. Once you've cast that tactical vote for the Democrat, you now have options. You could say, well, how about I go ahead and support my sincere favorite, the green, while I'm here, and maybe there's also an independent candidate that I like, or anybody you prefer to the sort of tactical starting point compromise position, you can then support all those people. Same basic idea with score voting. Star voting then adds this whole second level of an automatic runoff. So you really want to be sincere and not push your scores to the top and bottom. You want to be sincere in your rating so that in that top two majority runoff, as we saw in the example to begin here, I forget the candidates' names, but you're giving the one you like better a higher score so that you're helping in that majority situation there. And so the concern I have with ranked systems is that, and we don't really know when we look at a ranked ballot how honest it was. We can't tell, right? So the concern would just be that to be tactical and push the front runners apart as much as you can, so say you're a Green, you prefer Green, Democrat, Republican, you have to push the Green between the Democrat and Republican, and by definition that means you cannot show that the Green is your sincere favorite, and so I think that makes the sort of concerns about electability potentially become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's something we want to avoid. And then to touch on the transparency and all that, you can't sum up those rankings into a simple bar chart and see the support they had, and that could be disadvantageous to third-party candidates.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Aaron, 3 minutes. So what makes approval voting and what you feel is maybe the best, one of the best voting methods?
Sure. So again, approval voting, you simply pick as many candidates as you want. The candidate with the most votes wins. Also, I may get the record here for shortest explanation of the voting method, and that's worth noting. So one of the nice things about approval voting is you pay a very low complexity cost to implement this method. You don't need any special software. The ballot, you're just changing the directions, super easy to implement. Also, you get a lot for that low complexity cost that you're paying. It gives you nice consensus winners, which is great. When we look at our current choose one method, it fails basically the easiest of problems. So like a small time spoiler candidate can throw the election in our current choose one method. And while ranked choice voting addresses that as well, there was a Polkrin, I think the Republican candidate in Maine, threw up a fuss about not being about RCV, but it actually worked well in that election. But if you look at virtually any alternative voting method, it would have been able to handle that problem. That's a pretty easy problem for a voting method to be able to handle. Only the dumbest of voting methods, our choose one voting method, fails at that obstacle. And so one of the things that approval does well is it handles tougher problems, even with its simplicity. So it's more likely to get a Condorcet winner, that is that winner who's able to beat everyone head to head. And when you're implementing this, you don't have this issue of like, well, like I didn't understand it. Like if you're trying to convince people that it's too complicated, you basically have to convince them that they can't add, and that's a tough hurdle. And then finally, the information that you're providing under approval voting is super simple, and you're always incentivized to approve your honest favorite candidate. And that's important because right now under our current choose one method, it's really easy to marginalize a candidate. Those ideas that you cared about, like when you chose that candidate, it's really easy to marginalize them if they're only getting like 3% of the vote. But as we saw earlier with the primary poll results that we had done, some of these candidates, they're getting like 30%, whereas under our current choose one method, they got 3%. That's crazy. We can't keep on marginalizing candidates with new ideas and creating this high barrier to entry. Approval voting removes that and allows us to go forward and have the kind of democracy that we deserve.
All right, shortest explanations thus far. Thank you. That's Aaron Hamlin with the Center for Election Science. Rob Richie, why ranked choice voting?
Yeah. Well, I'm really super pleased at how it works in practice, and that's a really practical reality of just like, does this work when it's offered to voters? And let me sort of say on sort of a human level, what we're starting to see is that candidates change their behavior with voters, and it just is happening. And you know, there's good TV news stories about some of the recent elections where they sort of are with the candidates, and they're saying, yeah, I actually talk to all the voters now, and I knock on doors of people that I wouldn't have knocked on doors before. So that voters use their rankings, candidates expect that, and therefore they change their behavior. And that's very liberating, and certainly from a partisan election perspective, in Maine, the independent candidates in those congressional races, there weren't any third parties in that cycle, but they could participate, and they weren't spoilers, and actually their voters ultimately made the difference in one of the elections, and the fact that one of the major candidates kind of publicly disrespected them, he got punished for that, and so there's a certain power that it gives the voter. That's quite important. I think that Clay's kind of articulation of the difference of sort of the ordinal ballot and the rating ballot, I think is sort of the fundamental question here. I think that rating systems are very interesting polling methods. And actually, you see it pretty common, like which candidates are you considering, and so on. And I think we really should do more of that. And single choice polling, I think, is something we can all agree is like the stupidest thing going on sort of out there. But when we get to an election method of a practical reality of what people do when they're really trying to elect someone, the practical thing that we've seen with rating systems, and there's some differences about this, but the places that use it where I would call a meaningful election, they stop using the power that the system has offered them because they do want their first choice to win. Like that sort of earlier example of Warren and Biden and Trump, the Warren voters, by voting for Biden, would be saying, well, I'm giving up on Warren. And people just don't want to do that, right? So that they and I think star voting does a better job of dealing with that. So when we've seen approval used, and we haven't seen it done much, but when you have real data from the elections, like University of Colorado student elections or Dartmouth student elections, the great majority of people just starting for one person, and in ranked choice voting systems, the great majority of people use their rankings. So just the fact that the system has that kind of psychological impact and therefore the political the political impact of the difference that we're offering, I think is hugely important, and why I'm very pleased to keep working for ranked choice voting.
All right, thank you. Matt Otis of Free Equal Coalition.
All right, so
Why star voting?
why star
Best.
voting? So many of the great things in America are built off of two things in one. Macaroni and cheese, stars and stripes, peanut butter and jelly. Here we have score and automatic runoff. These two become greater than just each individual part. By putting them together, I kind of think of it as like another great pairing, concrete and rebar. Our entire world is built out of this. You have concrete, it's a simple material. It works almost everywhere. Almost anybody can apply it for foundations or anything like that. But if you put rebar in concrete, you turn a thing that might, under some cases, stress or fracture, but overall it's still a great material. But you put rebar in there, and you've got yourself an insanely robust system that is literally like the foundation for how we build our modern world. So with star voting, you have that score. It's so simple. Like literally, if you have one of these, not even a fancy one of these, this being a cell phone for those of you listening, you have participated in score voting actively. Either that or you've completely ignored every part of a smartphone, which is lots of scoring and so forth, or approval, disapproval, etc. We all participate in this. I actually did some runs whenever I was trying to see for my local neighborhood to see like what voting method would work best. And we just handed things to people to ask questions. And if you hand somebody a star ballot, and don't say it's a star ballot, just hand it to them and say, what do you like most? They fill it out right away and they know exactly how to do it. So there's no question about how to do it. And then the robustness of it, we're really getting, with star voting, we're getting everything that we've kind of talked about here through approval, through score, through RCV, of being able to, there's methods, the automatic runoff really encourages people to not just stack their candidates as either just bullet vote of score 5 for this person and 0 for everybody else, because you do have that distinction in that automatic runoff. And so it encourages you to fill out your full ballot. And additionally, there's some scenarios where, for example, for my scenario of having a very, very large multi-winner election, there was a local election near me that had 30 candidates. Having 30 candidates for 9 seats. 30 candidates for 9 seats would mean that you would have to have a 30 by 30 grid. I think that's like 900 different bullets that somebody would have to do, and if they maybe rank the wrong ones because there's 30 of them, their ballot might be invalid. That wouldn't happen with star voting. So that's a really great advantage of the simplicity of everything. You would just list the candidates. It works for single winner, it works for multi-winner, it works for multi-winner plurality. So it's a really robust system built off of all the lessons we've learned over time. And so yes, it's new. Yes, it's only on the West Coast right now. And even then, we're just trying to get it implemented. But you know what? I think we've got a really good thing going here that gives us the best of all worlds. So let's take our concrete and rebar. Let's take our stars and stripes. Let's put them together and come up with a better system.
All right, well, thank you. Well, I'm just really pleased that with the different ideas we have here, one thing we can agree on is that anything is better than what the current system uses for voting, which is one of many different fundamental flaws of our electoral system. We've spoken of quite a few today, from the multi-winner proportional representation to gerrymandering to risk limiting audits to online petitions. We need that. And so I'm really excited, and it's really been 7 years in the making to bring this sort of caliber of intellectuals and experts together. And I wanted to plug at the beginning that I wanted to thank Fair Elections for Colorado, who's sponsoring this event. I think it's 5 years in a row now, and Frank Atwood being supportive of this with approval voting. We welcome all different types of voting methods and organizations and groups to support us in the future so we can expand this to an all-weekend conference or so on. So on that note, I want to open it up to the audience. We're going to have free flow discussion here. I asked the panelists to be aware of their time when they respond and just really take turns. So please, our first audience question for the symposium.
Thank
and
you.
there's a line here.
So first I want to say thank you for the visual charts, Clay Shentrup, the pie chart, because it really is we currently have everyone fighting over the biggest slice of pie versus comparing everybody on their own individual merits. And so I was really glad to see that put visually. My question is for Mr. Otis about star voting. I guess I'm just kind of unsure on specifically how it would work.
Okay.
So the runoff part at the end, that's after everybody's all totaled up, all their scores added up, the top two people. How often is it that the runoff stage is even necessary? How often is it that the person with the highest score out of all of the candidates is not the most liked out of the two? Is that something you expect to see often, or is it just a contingency?
That is a fantastic question, and I know that y'all have been involved in the literature a little bit more too, so feel free to pipe up too. Overall, typically whenever somebody gets the highest score, they're most likely going to also win the automatic runoff. There's a couple of reasons though that some folks are not completely comfortable with purely the score vote, and there are some mathematical possibilities for when somebody might win the top score but not win in every head-to-head. Usually that's going to be one group is ranking them as like all fives, and then maybe strategically or something, and then everybody else is kind of like, I don't know, I thought they were a 3. And so in those mathematical places, that's really where that automatic runoff comes in. It's that rebar to the strong concrete that really just makes it hold up well, so that you can't have anybody come in with their strategy and game the system. And I might defer to one of y'all if you know a little bit more detail.
I'd make a quick comment, which is that if you think about how strategic voting works, oftentimes it's kind of like a seatbelt. You don't think you're going to need your seatbelt, but you wear it just in case. If somebody likes, say, the Green Party candidate but votes Democrat, they're not necessarily thinking that there will be a spoiler effect in a wrong way election, but they're just voting strategically just in case. And so really this top two runoff thing is sort of there to counter that. It's just in case, right? It's like you know that you're going to be able to count in that head-to-head runoff. And so it's going to incentivize a greater level of honesty, even if the winner wasn't going to change anyway. It's like, why not just do it so that in case, like your vote really is going to have the highest impact possible. Right.
I'm going to steal cars and seatbelts.
There you go.
So, all right.
Thank you. Any other? You're good? Okay.
Thanks very much.
Hi there. This is a fabulous panel. I'm so glad you all came. Sometimes people call for a voting method to show majority support for the winner. But it is literally impossible in practice to always find that. For example, there are times when a majority refuse to vote for either of the front runners. We say that their ballots are exhausted in the case of instant runoff voting. So I'm wondering if the panel can all agree that it would be an insult to those voters whose ballots were exhausted to show in the final round of an instant runoff vote as a percent of only the remaining ballots. In other words, to confirm that there is, in some elections, no way to get to declare a winner who had a majority of all the voters who showed up to vote.
Aaron, would you like to?
I can follow up if Rob wants to, since it's more of his area, if he wants to start it off.
I mean, one way to think of it is for abstentions. So when an instant runoff system, ranked choice voting, it's a voluntary ranking system, right? So in Australia, you mandate rankings, and so they always get, the last round winner always has a majority of the first round vote because they've mandated that that's the only valid ballot. that you've had to express a preference for everyone. We are allowing abstention in the United States. One way to think of it is that we got a lot of people not voting, sadly, in this country. You know, we had a nice uptick in turnout in 2018. Yay, we got up to 50%, right? So that means half of the voters didn't vote. So we always could show results of saying, well, let's start off by adding in all the people that could have voted in this election and didn't, and then we'll just show the percentage, which actually could be kind of interesting to do, and show that, you know, almost every winner ends up with 22% or 19% or whatever it is. But if you accept the logic that we allow we allow abstention in the United States and that we're not mandating rankings, there is a certain logic to say in the final round of those who had a preference between the two, it was 52 to 48 or whatever it is. I certainly don't. I think you should report the inactive votes, which is the term that I use for them. But I think you should report inactive voters that didn't vote either, and it's sort of a similar thing. But I think your point also is that you can't force people to like someone, and you can't force a majority to express a affirmative preference unless you mandate it like they do in Australia.
So I think there are a couple points there. One is, like, for instance, with ranked choice voting, when you're seeing this comparison between the two at the end, you're really looking at the subset of original ballots. So these are just, like, this is just a fraction of people from the people who were originally participating in the election. So the exhausted ballot issue is one way to address the majority issue. The second issue is that whenever you have only two candidates, you can guarantee a majority there, but you can't guarantee a majority when you have more than two candidates. Some voting methods attempt to do so. For instance, with ranked choice voting, you have this sequence of multiple rounds until you get two candidates at the end. But what you're doing there is you're just coming up with an arbitrary rule, fewest number of first choice votes, as a way of narrowing down the field. And intuitively, when we look at this, we may think, well, that makes sense. But we have to keep in mind that just like when we're voting and with just one vote, we can have vote splitting occur through there. And just like that happens, like vote splitting among similar candidates, you can also split first choice preferences. And sometimes good candidates, even Condorcet winners, winners who can beat everyone else head to head, those candidates can get eliminated under ranked choice voting. So the point is there that the way that they're getting to just two candidates at the end is an artificial way. And we're not really creating a majority there, we're more contriving it. So it's important to remind ourselves that if we're chasing this majority, this is really kind of more like chasing a rainbow. So.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Next question from the audience.
Well, piggybacking on that, I think in approval, it's very possible where you could say, oh, well, I approve Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and they could both get over 50% approval, right? And either candidate, you could say, had a majority, to be elected president. But of course, only one of them can win. But still, they were both acceptable to be president, and the majority of people thought that they were acceptable. But my question is, I have one question for SCORE and one question for RCV. For SCORE, so you're using a 0 to 5 scale, and I guess 0 is like abstention, is that right?
Within star voting?
Oh, yeah, within star voting?
Yes, 0 to 5, and then abstention defaults to 0, yes.
Okay, so 5 obviously is an arbitrary number. Why did you guys settle on 5? Is that because of like movie ratings, or is there?
They did start, by the way. I remember when Mark invented this. He started with a 0 to 9 scale, and there was this pragmatic. When you look at the results that you get when you do like computer simulations, there's diminishing returns. Like yes, more is sort of more accurate, but you also get like a wider ballot. And there was a pragmatic decision made, probably within a year of that initial proposal, to be like, 0 to 5 is fine. It's almost as good, and it's just a smaller ballot. It's simpler. It's very intuitive because people use 0 to 5 stars on like Amazon, Yelp, you name it. So it was sort of just a pragmatic thing.
Why not just let them write in a decimal number, right? I mean,
there you go.
That's actually completely so. In some scored voting methods, you would do that, and this really come back to the simplicity. One of these strongest. We got to remember that we are ultimately fighting first past the post and plurality at large. There are a lot of people that are very terrified of anything beyond the checkbox, which is honestly why, even though I'm here to support star voting, if I see approval voting on any sort of ballot measure, I'm gonna check it. But not twice, because I don't want my ballot to not get counted. But I would love to check it twice, because these are all better methods that we could potentially be using. And 0 to 5 helps keep the ballot simpler while also giving a relatively good range so that people that do want to put a little bit more distinction, because really approval is just a 0 to 1.
Right.
So it gives you a little bit more range to be able to make a decision without overwhelming you with possible options.
Okay, now my question for RCV. So you count the number of first place votes, and then you eliminate the lowest number of first place votes, the candidate with the lowest number. Now, that seems arbitrary also. I mean, you could just as easily count the number of last place votes and then eliminate the candidate with the most last place votes. But in reality, you're ignoring most of the ballots for most of the voters, right? Because you're not taking into account all of their preferences that they've sort of exhibited. I mean, why only count the number of first place votes, and why not use some other method?
So I think part of this is the crowdsourcing, what works. So, for instance, Robert's Rules of Order, spells out that when you're all together in person, like if we as a group here were to try to get a winner, they recommend repeated voting. So you vote and you vote again and you kind of compromise and you finally get up to a majority winner. When they say you can't do that, when it's practically not possible to do that, they recommend what they call preferential voting, but it's ranked choice voting. And that's come from like lots of organizations and lots of states and countries, trying to do something that practically works. Why do all the Canadian political parties, including ones that don't want it for the public elections for some political reason, but they actually elect their leaders with it? It's because it works. So it functions like people can accept the logic that a candidate in last place loses. It's kind of a logical outcome to people. And having a system actually be working and having people use it is sort of the most fundamental thing that's important to me. That we're all trying to do something that deals with the plague, or the problem of the plurality system. It's just that we're seeing that this rule works and it's logical to people. And I don't think it's arbitrary. Like if you're in last place, I'm sorry, there's a reasonable reason for you to lose.
Unless you were the second choice on the majority ballots.
But then you're getting into this rabbit hole, and this is the big rabbit hole, right? That if your second choice helps defeat your first choice, there's a whole logical thing that happens in the real world of elections. So when approval voting, this is something I'd like to have Aaron talk about. Why did the biggest association that has approval voting stop using it, right? Why did the Dartmouth students stop using it? Why, when they used it, did the winners of their presidential elections for the student body drop significantly from when they had ranked choice voting? It's because they started to bullet vote, right? They didn't, so the winners were not getting over half the votes, right? It wasn't two people getting over 50%. The winner was getting 34% or 35% or whatever. And it's so we have to have a system that works psychologically as well as mathematically.
Thank you. Would you like to address that?
Sure. So it's possible for candidates to run and for them to be so independent of one another that they have non-overlapping support. Perhaps that was the case in that particular election. But it's also important to think about this criticism of approval voting with the idea that everyone is going to choose only one candidate. There are really three good reasons why we don't think that's the case. One is that, first, in some cases it may make sense to choose only one candidate. But it's really important that you have the option to do so when you really need it. So if there's a third-party candidate you really like, you want to show support for that candidate, but maybe you also want to have a say in the outcome. Approval voting lets you do that. Also, when we look at data with the number of approvals per ballot, we see that the number of approvals per ballot increases as there are more candidates. And so when we see a smaller field, for instance, in 2016, we did a nationally representative study, polling comparing multiple different voting methods. And when we did that within a 4-candidate field, we saw a lot of voters, respondents, choose only one candidate. 80% of them did this. Now, in that particular scenario, with fewer candidates, it didn't make sense for as many of them to choose more than one. But what it did make a difference in is it made a difference in support for the third-party candidates. Even with only 20% of people choosing more than one candidate, it went from Jill Stein getting only 1% to 9% under approval voting, and it took Gary Johnson from 3% to 21%. So even when a fraction of people do this, it still helps be able to better create that reflection support for other candidates. And further, like even in a scenario when 80% of people are choosing only one candidate, there are plenty of elections when the margin of victory between the person who comes in first and second is under 20%.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? This might be the last one because we want to have about 2 minutes for wrapping up closing statements for our panel.
Sure. There's a Monty Python skit, I don't know whether you're all Monty Python fans, where there's a woman in a swamp and she's handing out swords and somebody comes along and says, I'm actually not going to remember the exact line now, but a woman handing out swords in swamps is not the basis for a democracy like it. And to a certain extent, I feel like your oft-cited explanation that this is about, this was born in a math lab, and this is game theory, and this is how this works among mathematicians, instills as much confidence in me as a woman in a swamp handing out a sword. I feel like it's somewhat of a paper tiger to say that this works in a math lab in simulations, because it doesn't really match with real world experience as I see it in politics, having worked on a lot of campaigns. Every campaign I've worked on, people have strong preferences. And the reason I support ranked choice voting is that I want to give people an opportunity to really express that preference and to not be, I would say, trapped in a voting system where if I did cast a vote in an approval voting system for Jill Stein, that really would in every way hurt the chances of the other candidate I might approve of Hillary Clinton getting elected. And so I see that as a challenge of approval voting. I'd also like to say that some of the data around ranked choice voting outcomes in the real world of politics are terrific. For women candidates, that's something I really care about. For civility in campaigns, for issue focus. So I think there's a whole universe of other issues that go beyond this simplicity argument that I keep hearing that don't reflect the what actually happens in these races with ranked choice voting that I think is almost as important as the actual mechanism of it. So I think that's something that I guess we'll see as more systems, more alternative systems get in play. We'll be able to compare that data. But I want to underscore one of the reasons there's so much support for ranked choice voting is that we can see the data, we can see the increase in civility, the increase in number of women getting elected, the increase in issue-focused campaigns, and all those matter a lot to me.
All right. Would anybody like to respond to that?
Sure.
Approval?
Yeah. So
Things like.
some of those attributes, virtually any other voting method other than our choose one voting method would be able to do. It's also important to recognize that the mere fact that we cast a ballot and put it in the ballot box does not magically create a good winner. And we have to think, well, is there a good winner who's elected? And in order to do that, what we have to do is we have to look at the data. And we can't just look at it within easy elections. So when we look at a lot of RCV elections, they chose a good winner. But also, plurality voting would have chosen the same winner. Like a lot of those contests are just not hard for voting methods. When you really want to test a voting method, you have to give it a harder problem to solve. And when you give ranked choice voting harder problems to solve, like Burlington in 2009, when a number of conservative voters were punished by ranking their honest favorites first and getting the worst possible outcome. And then it was repealed within 4 months of that particular election. So it's not just about casting our ballot and then feeling good about ourselves. We have to use data to be able to figure out if the winner that resulted was any good. There's no other way to go about this. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that the idea that the math is sort of divorced from the real world just could not be more untrue based on what I have seen. I mean, in the year 2000, the AINS, American National Election Studies, did an exit poll where they showed that of people who claimed to favor Ralph Nader, something like 90% of them claimed they also voted for someone other than Nader, right? So they love Ralph Nader, but they don't vote for him, right? They don't just do everything to get their favorite elected at all costs because they don't think he can win. So strategic voting there means voting for someone who is not your favorite. Now, does anybody really have any doubt that the favorite betrayal criterion, this ability to vote fearlessly for your favorite candidate, would not have applied? I truly believe that every single one of those Nader supporters would have also cast a vote for Ralph Nader, and I have never heard a plausible argument as to why they would not if it was there's no cost to doing that. We've also looked at cases like, look at Dartmouth, okay? Their last election, when they used to use it in the Alumni Association, there were 4 candidates. The average number of approvals per ballot in this real-world contentious election was 1.81 out of 4 candidates. So that's nearly approving half of all the candidates. So we just have so much empirical data that backs this up. And then you go back to I've been having this conversation with my aunt in Des Moines, Iowa about people like Elizabeth Warren, who she says, oh, she's great, but I couldn't vote for her because I'm worried she wouldn't win in the next round. And that same strategy completely applies to like an instant runoff voting scenario. So yes, it may not feel super gratifying to say, I'm going to vote for Warren and also vote for Joe Biden just to make sure Trump doesn't win. But what would be even worse is if you feel compelled to throw Warren under the bus and rank her below Joe Biden so that Joe makes it to the next round and you get your lesser evil. That to me is much worse than rating them both equally. So,
All right, thank you.
There's a point that she hit on that I'd love to touch, is that whenever we're talking about these systems too, one of the things I really like that you spoke about was how women and other groups can start getting involved and so forth. And I think that is a fantastic point. And a panel full of white dudes and our host might not be the best ones to claim like we
One
are
woman.
supporting. Yes.
Start.
So that said, one of the key leaders within the star voting is a woman. And I did not work in a vacuum at all in my local neighborhood associations. We actually got the women on the board with us were actually some of our staunchest supporters. And while I've been carrying the mantle a little bit, it could not have happened without them. And the whole goal is to try to create this more civil space and result in a lot less of the bang, bang pendulum that we have today where things swing wildly. I think that almost any of these methods will result in something kinder. I don't think that's truly something only in the realm of RCV, but I'm so glad that it's working with RCV, but let's maybe try some other ones too.
And let me just sort of comment, because this is the part of the challenge that we face, because if we truly kind of accepted that attitude, then a lot of the sort of underlying hostility or tension that is here and that has existed wouldn't be there. Like the first time I heard about range voting was Warren Smith writing a letter to a city opposing them voting on ranked choice voting because he said they should vote for range voting instead. The first time I've heard from most people and saying, why are you doing this bad thing when you should be doing this thing? Mm-hmm. When ranked choice voting advocates sort of are saying, why are you doing this instead of this? Like instead of doing what you are starting to do, which is great, right? Which is like, I'm going to go try to win this somewhere. The dynamic has been not saying, well, this is also a good system. It's saying, well, my system's better. In fact, you're doing a Google ad right now, Aaron, that says like, go to Center for Election Science. It's better than ranked choice voting, right? So you're already creating a dynamic where we need to have a piece that says, no, it's not, right? It's sort of already in that sort of space. And the piece that you don't like about star voting is because Sarah Wolf is like really against ranked choice voting and very hostile against it. So we need to say, well, here's why we have made the choice not to be for it, right? So, but also trying to be as sort of open to it as we can. I think it might have been you who sort of helped steer, at least to trying to say, some of the things that we do think are positive. And I think some of the things that Aaron said about approval are, that is better than having plurality. The Dartmouth example that I think is an interesting one. So in the student elections, they really did mostly just bullet vote. In the alumni elections, not as many of them did, but what they were finding was that a faction that was a dissident faction was bullet voting, and the less organized faction wasn't, and that they were getting winners tied to that they didn't think would win with a single choice system. So when they went to a single choice system it was an 80% rejection of approval, by the way, when they voted with the alumni, they actually did start getting different winners, right? So that the tactical voting that was going, where you had one faction that was bullet voting and the others weren't, that created a problem. So that's something that we'll have to see if it plays out more. Good luck in Fargo. I genuinely believe that. But also, we'll finally get some more data, and it wouldn't be sort of having this sort of paper tiger versus ranked choice voting. Just last thing I'll say is that you sort of say, oh, well, ranked choice voting doesn't deal with complex elections. We've had more than 200 ranked choice voting elections. Many, many are really complex elections with no one having more than 30% or a lot of dynamics. So if we accept that the Condorcet winner is at least a credible way to assess whether you have a fair outcome, one election didn't get the Condorcet winner. And we have data from all those others, and a lot of them very complex. And yes, you did get the Condorcet winner, and you also had kind of a logical system that was easier to win and sort of easier to use. Last thing I'll say, Burlington City Council just indicated that's going to vote to put ranked choice voting back on the ballot. So ranked choice voting may be coming back to Burlington too.
All right, did we have one question? Are we okay with another question, everyone?
I have a quick one,
Okay.
which would just be, you guys think about this probably most of your days, most of your nights, all the time. And it's so great to see you guys agreeing on, any of these systems would be better than the one we have now, bring in more people, get more consideration. So my question would be, you also are probably kept up at night in the sense of implementation. So let's say like each of your dreams comes true and you each start making progress. You get into 10, 15 jurisdictions or whatever. What's your fear of your own system in one sentence of where it could go wrong in the just implementation, right? Not that like it was like intellectually it went wrong, but really strategically it went wrong, so that we can all think about the ways that we all trying to move any of these systems forward can make sure not to make those same mistakes that you fear maybe your supporters will accidentally make. Does that question make sense or rephrased?
Yes, it makes sense to me. Let's see how they answer it.
Okay.
I take turns on orders, and we'll go with Aaron, and then for closing statement, we'll start with Rob. So, because that's the final question.
Yeah, maybe I'll let someone else clarify this question first.
So it sounds basically like wanting a quick answer of if there's like one thing that could go wrong, or you look back in post-mortem and say like, if only I had done this, it could have done even better. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, but in one sentence.
Implemented the way you want.
Can I say sort of a real life experience? And we have found, so we were not a very well resourced organization for a long time. So we were able to kind of like help make victories happen, but not really often do as much as we wished we could on the implementation side. And I think one of the things, the lessons that we have learned, and we should all learn this, and I'm sure you're thinking about this in Fargo, is invest in the implementation, invest in candidates feeling comfortable with the system. Try to figure out tactics where they'll come to the table and learn about their new rules, sort of an open playbook for it. We didn't always do that, and then so there's sort of the feared outcome was like people not adapting to the rules and then complaining about the rules because they didn't adapt to them. So that the thing that I guess I would fear is not taking that part seriously. It's sort of a general answer, but say New York City has just passed ranked choice voting. It's a rather huge city. They are expecting more than 500 candidates running for offices, and they got all these big open seat races. If we weren't attentive as a community of people that care about this to really working hard to implement it, there would be accidents happening just in the sense of political misunderstanding and so on. So the fear would be sitting back and sort of eating popcorn and not paying full attention to what you need to do to help make things work.
All right, does anybody else want to respond?
Or just take Rob's answer.
I can take a really quick thing. I think
One sentence like Rob's.
But just looking back at American history, for whatever reason, in the early 1900s, around 1913, we had like up to, I think Celeste said something like 60 U.S. cities were using Buckland. That's sort of like a hybrid of instant runoff voting and approval voting. I think it's actually better in some ways and simpler, and it still got repealed in every single one of those cities, right? There was another era, a decade or so later, of something like 24 U.S. cities using ranked choice voting of some forms, single transferable vote or IRV, repealed in every single one except for Cambridge, Massachusetts. Then a few decades later, we have this new wave. I think was it Ann Arbor, Michigan, or some Michigan city using it, eventually repealing it. Burlington, Vermont, repealing it. Aspen, Colorado, Pierce County, Washington. Although now you are seeing it kind of catch on and stick in areas like the Bay Area where I lived for many years, San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, San Lorenzo, and all this. So maybe now something's different, and we as a society are more comfortable with technology. We have the internet and these tech devices, but we really want to be mindful of I'm very ambitious about this whole notion of star voting. I think it's still simpler than instant runoff, but it could still have enough complexity that there's blowback and it gets repealed. So we got to experiment and see. Approval voting is the only system I can really look at and say there's just no way you can repeal that by a complexity argument. So.
Go ahead, Matt.
To kind of hit that question, if I had to say in one sentence what happened if it went wrong, I'm going to try to say that fear, uncertainty, and doubt are the killers. So, Rob, I would love from you if I could get a commitment of like anything against one of these other second tier quality, or maybe third, wherever you think you are, but not bottom tier. Just a sentence at the top that says, this is better than what we've got today. Is that a possibility?
I think it actually already says that, but we
It
should.
does?
But
Okay. So if it doesn't, can we make it say that?
we should go over that. And then there's a whole bunch of material on all of our websites that needs a certain kind of rigor and a certain kind of like these ad tactics and others that we need to sort of think about. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So fear, uncertainty, and doubt is the killer. For me, I'm in Oregon. We have sit in your underwear at your couch voting. It's fantastic. So that if you really want to get the voter turnout, the more people can just sit at home in whatever attire they wish and vote, the better off we'll be. And a lot of those were covered in earlier topics.
All right, guys, y'all want to do about a 1 minute or so wrap up?
I want to do.
We have another question?
Quick comment, if you would.
It's hard to say no to you, so
Thank
you're the only one up there.
So in Colorado, we do vote in our underwear.
Okay.
So I want to make a request of all of you. Quit the Ford versus Chevy. Stop it. It doesn't work. Talk about the benefits of what your system is. I favor one system over the other, but I like them both. They're far better than our stupid vote for one and only one system, which is archaic and idiotic. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. All right, Rob, you want to wrap up? A minute or two tops?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the last person said what I hope we can get to, which is that there is an acceptance that ranked choice voting has legitimate advocates that think it's a good thing and are going to keep working for it, but that there are new entries in the field that are, we hope, going to get wins and going to get uses, and we'll sort of see them in action. And that I think if we can figure out ways to tone down the levels of intra-party kind of sectarian behavior, I'm all for it. And I think, Christina, thanks for bringing us together to help promote that kind of conversation. And there has been more of that kind of effort to do that. But the very fact that it's challenging is a bit of an indication of the challenge in general of systems that are based on sort of voting for more than one thing at a time. So it's something that we'll have to kind of work on, but we'll have to sort of accept that there's a certain human psychology that's to it. But I'll say this, that ranked choice voting is sort of on the move in a very significant way. It is, for me, a part of a solution that is part of other ones as well, and I really want to make sure that a proportional system, the ranked choice voting in multi-member districts, is understood as where we need to go for our congressional elections and legislative elections. And Christina, thanks again for elevating that today as well.
Thank you, Rob. And your website for the viewers?
Oh, www.fairvote.org, fairvote.org.
Fairvote.org. Thank you, Rob Richie, founder of Fairvote. Matt Otis.
All right. Thank you so much for letting me come here. I know star voting is a relative newcomer on this scene. However, I love this methodology because it is so simplistic to use, yet so robust mathematically, which can be good. And hopefully, we're going to get this more and more out into the real world, and we're going to see that it's more than just math, that people are going to really love it. So far, in the areas that we've already talked about it, it's brought about amazing consensus. Whenever I've done sessions like in people's living rooms trying to figure out the system, one of the biggest challenges has actually been like, wait, how do I game this? And then they're learning, oh, I don't have to game it. What? And it's just such a disconnect from where we are today of, I want to try to vote strategically. And you can vote honestly, and it feels really great. It's like a hot shower after a cold day skiing or something. It's just, you just relax the moment it happens. So star voting is extremely rigorous. It's like that concrete and rebar. You got this simple thing with this underpinning underneath that's going to keep it extremely strong. And it works within a single winner system. It works within multi-winner systems. And it's a system that we can keep moving as we're going to, hopefully, we kept hearing proportional, proportional, proportional. Star voting system is going to be able to give us the same score ballot for all of these different purposes. And that's really, really fantastic. So if star voting is something that is a new word for you, please go check us out. The Equal Vote Coalition's website is equal.vote, just .vote is now a thing. And then also we have starvoting, all one word, .us, starvoting.us. Check it out, try it out for yourself. It's star voting, deserves a closer look, and I really want you to get into the details so that you can check it out and hopefully bring it to your community. We shouldn't just be isolated in our own little pocket on the West Coast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Matt Otis of the Equal Vote Coalition. Great to have you. Clay Shentrup.
Yeah, so I think it's important to think about the context we're all operating in. This is really grueling, often thankless work that we do. So why do we sort of joust at these windmills, right? And for me, I have 2 small children. I think every day about the world that I'm going to leave behind for them, the world I'm going to raise them up in. I think about urgent matters like climate change, the spread of authoritarian governments, and I legitimately worry, and it keeps me up at night. And the one thing I'm able to console myself with at the end of the day is that we have sort of arrived, after many grueling decades of this kind of hard work, we are sort of at the threshold, we're sort of pushing through the gates into this new era where the whole fear-based voting and having such limited options is on its way out if we can keep doing what we're doing. And I honestly believe that I appreciate all the different ways people are tackling world issues, whether it's Bill Gates working on sanitation in Africa or somebody trying to get more people out to vote. But there's one thing I think we can all agree on in this little panel here, despite our different solutions to the problem, it's that this is really an underappreciated area. This kind of dry mathematical area of the whole system actually has a huge amount of potential to just upend the whole system. So I think all these wins, like New York getting adopting instant runoff voting, and new systems like approval voting in Fargo, the potential we're on the cusp of maybe getting star voting used and we can try it out in Oregon. These are such massive groundbreaking reforms, and the thing is that it's really not an intractable problem. Like you at home watching this, you can, if you live in a city that is not too large, you can just go to your city council and talk to them, or you can run your own ballot initiative with the help of organizations like Center for Election Science, Fair Vote, whoever. And it's actually, the power is actually in your hands. So I just encourage everyone, if this is a matter that you are passionate about and you see the opportunity here, don't be afraid, don't have imposter syndrome. Just get out there and go find how you can be a part of it.
Thank you, Clay. Appreciate it. Aaron, Hamlin Center for Election Science.
We're very excited to advocate for approval voting. Again, if you forgot what that is, you pick as many candidates as you want. Most votes wins, super easy. You get a more consistent style winner. It addresses the spoiler effect. All the candidates that would otherwise get marginalized get an accurate reflection of support if they earn that support. And you can always support your honest favorite, no matter what. I think one reason that it becomes sometimes challenging when we're looking and comparing different voting methods is that we're not exactly on the same plane in terms of progress, in terms of one voting method being implemented in more places. And so when we're looking at these, part of it, what we're trying to do is we're trying to level the playing field. So for instance, like no voting method can guarantee a majority. So when a particular voting method group talks about a majority, it makes it challenging. Also, like when I read in the Philadelphia Inquirer for another major ranked choice voting advocacy group talking about how you can always rank your favorite as first and it'll be fine, that makes it challenging because they're talking about a pro for that voting method that they actually don't have, and approval voting does have that. So, and that makes it challenging when we're going and we're talking to communities and we're saying, okay, well, you recognize that the voting method that you have is terrible because you're using this terrible choose one method, and they're looking at a new solution there. And they deserve a better solution. And they also deserve to be able to see how these voting methods compare. So if they're shopping, they deserve something like a consumer reports of voting methods to be able to see what qualities a voting method has versus what it doesn't. And approval voting has a lot of those great qualities. You deserve a more consistent style winner. You deserve to be able to always support your honest favorite no matter what. And you deserve to have the candidates that you like not get marginalized when they actually have support. And so if this is something that you want to see in your city, I encourage you to go to electionscience.org and take action.
All right, thank you so much. And I wanted to end on this note I mentioned briefly before. Probably one of the best questions I've ever been asked in an interview was, have you ever met a hero? Has there ever been somebody in your life that's been a hero? In my case, a heroine to myself. And it was Amelia Boynton Robinson of Selma. And in the last interview that I had with her, it was actually produced by Real Politics, and that we work with different productions. And what she said during that interview was I have no fear. And in 1920s, when she registered people to vote with her mother in a buggy wagon, and as a child, being an African-American woman, her mother taught her, of which she messaged to me, be sure you're right, then go ahead. And everybody here, in my viewpoint, is right. And I urge all of you to go ahead. And, you know, Rob and all of you talked a little bit earlier about the right to vote, right? And hearing the right to vote. And the system is intentionally flawed, I feel, in making us feel like our vote doesn't count, we shouldn't vote, there's no candidates, and this and that. That is all the more reason to go out there and make change, because there's far more of us than there are of them. We are the 99%, they are not even the 1%. And when we stand united here in the United States of America, and united we stand, we will see the right leaders being elected, targeting the congressional races first, a couple hundred seats. Mainstream media leads us to believe the presidential race is more important. It's not. Congress is key. When we see those candidates getting replaced, pretty much all of them, with candidates that support the sort of topics that we spoke about in this entire symposium, that's when we're going to see change for maybe even more than 50 years. Amelia Boynton Robinson at the Montgomery and the March of Selma, she changed America for 50 years. It was because of her that the Voting Rights Act was drafted by the former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, whom I've also met at his personal home in Manhattan several times. And so these individuals have fought for our right to vote, and we have got to rise as a nation to do that together. So I really am so grateful to see the differences that you have. The energy today is so beautiful, so much compassion, and the respect that we all have for one another. And I urge everybody in this room and everybody with this panel to spread it. I want to thank the lot here, the RiNo District, a community-run Alan here that runs it with the whole team, all of you out here being here today. I want to thank Adam Monroe of Stony Hill Studios over there, who's been on our tour, and Jared Pesci of Real Politics has been on our tour, and also done the interviews with Amelia Boynton Robinson and Moby and many others that we have done. And I want to thank the audience. My take is let the people decide. Let's put the ideas out there, and when we shift the power from the federal to the local, from the state to the local level, we'll let the people decide, and maybe it'll just be different kinds of alternative voting methods for different counties. So thank you again. I appreciate you having us. It's the end of our 7th annual voting electoral reform symposium. And once again, our sponsor, Frank Atwood, Fair Elections for Colorado. Let's thank Frank for making this happen like 5 years in a row, I think. Like him that keep this going, and we definitely urge more people, more organizations, and so on to support and sponsor. Join Frank, and we can take this to a whole nother level. We have the team and the support. You're seeing a fraction of them here today. So thank you. You can go to freeandequal.org to view all of the videos from the symposium, and it's been such a great being here in the RiNo District at the lot. All right, thanks. And we're going to have a break here for a few minutes. And we're going to wrap up with a 10-minute pre-recorded video of Colin Cantrell of Nexus on the blockchain election system app that Free and Equal Elections will be launching next year. We will be having 4 stops of our United We Stand tour next year. The final stop will present our presidential debate and launch the blockchain app, which will allow voters to decide through different alternative voting methods who won that round of debates, and also implement every single candidate running for office. We'll start with the congressional races, and we'll build it as fast as we can, as much as the people want to, and the support towards this organization will allow us to. And then we're going to wrap up with Colin. I'll do a brief 5-minute PowerPoint presentation of Free and Equal's vision and investment deck of what we're going to be doing in 2020 and the years and decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.